Hello, good evening, and welcome to Community Speaks 2021, Speaking the Taboo. As we mark the 1 year anniversary of this pandemic, can't help but look back over the past 1 year. While this year has brought upon many hardships, I'm also very proud of the work Tasveer has done. We quickly transitioned from physical to virtual events, produced the first ever virtual Uniki Bath, hosted monthly panels with filmmakers and authors, led a coalition of 7 film festivals across North America to host the largest virtual South Asian film festival with a global viewership of over 45,000 people. And we launched our very own OTT platform, Tasveer TV, to help provide a larger platform and financial support to South Asian filmmakers.
For more information on what Tasveer is doing, please visit our website tasveer.org. You can also follow us on social media with the handle @tasveer.org. This also happens to be our fundraiser weekend, and if you haven't had the chance to support our work, please go to our website to do so. This year, we made the difficult decision of putting Yoniki Bath on hiatus, but we still wanted to bring to you stories of resilience and courage. In doing so, we were able to evolve our flagship program, Community Speaks, and open up the space to all community members across North America. I want to take a moment to thank all the people who helped us during the duration of the workshops over the last 3 months. Thank you, Natasha Arora. Thank you, Farah Nausheen. And thank you, Rita Meher. Before I invite the participants, there are a few virtual house rules. Trigger warning. I'd like to highlight that the content of this program can be triggering. The participants will be sharing various sensitive issues such as suicide, domestic violence, physical abuse, and more. Please do not record this video. Please treat this show as if it's live and watch it without any distractions. There will be a live Q&A after our Saturday and Sunday shows. If you would like to ask any questions to our participants, please post them in the chat box on the video. Please note, on Saturday and Sunday, once the monologue ends, you will have to join another YouTube link for the Q&A. The link is shared in the chat box. Now, without any further ado, it is my great pleasure and honor to introduce the participants of Community Speaks 2021, Speaking the Taboo. Even though they have only met virtually, the bond that this group has formed is commendable, and I can't wait for you all to hear their inspiring stories. Finally, I present to you our participants. Abhishek Kulkarni. He is joining us from our very own Seattle. Aditya Babbar, who is joining us from Toronto. Dipti Trastka, who's joining us from Seattle. Masoon Baluch, who's joining us from Montreal. Mohima Barua from Seattle again. Paroma Sanyal. Paroma is joining us from Washington, D.C. Saleha Yunus, who is from Seattle but is joining us from Dallas. And last but not the least, Turfa Tasneem, who is joining us from Toronto. Welcome, guys. It is my pleasure to welcome you all to this Community Speaks platform. Let's not keep our audiences waiting any longer. And with that, I present to you our first participant. Our first participant is Dipti, and the title of her story is Whispers Find a Voice.
Whispers find a voice. Drenched in sweat, heart pounding, dry mouth, fear in my eyes. I want to run as fast as I can. My legs and chest feel heavy, like a 1,000-ton boulder is crushing me. I'm stuck, trapped in quicksand and unable to move. Why can't I get away? Fear and panic take over me. A scream is forming in my core. I open my mouth, but no words come out. I have lost my voice again. Will this nightmare ever stop haunting me? I entered the world in the late 60s. Darling of my small family, My grandma wasn't too happy. After my sister, her first grandchild, she wanted a boy. I had ruined her plan, and boy, did she make her feelings known. Here I was, in a family where I was loved and wanted, but born into a larger extended family where I was not, into a society where a female is viewed as a burden, into a country where female power, the Devi, the goddess, is worshipped as epitomes of beauty, power, wisdom, and fury, but in the real world is defiled and assaulted with ease, tossed aside when used and no longer needed. Soft spoken, patient, enduring, quiet, sensitive, considerate was some adjectives described me. For me, words were not always spoken out, but held inside my heart as I struggled to decide if there was value in sharing or more in introspection. Moving back to live with my grandma and my extended family at age 10 came with a lot of stress and anxiety for me, and I started to wet the bed. I had trouble finding the right words, and I feared being shamed like I was broken or defective in some way. Again, the words were buried deep in me, and my turmoil came out at night when I was asleep onto the sheets. Shame and sadness came over me as I was forced to take medication. Treating emotions with medication far more acceptable for those around me than facing the root of the stress. Could I speak out and tell someone what was happening to me? So fortunate I had my mom. My mom, a woman way ahead of her time, notorious for speaking her mind and not suffering fools, was my safe harbor during this storm. She listened to my heart and helped me through this really embarrassing time. We sat together and practiced positive self talk as I learned to repeat a mantra daily at night. I said, I will get through this with a prayer. And in a few months, I stopped wetting the bed. I was a typical teen, busy with friends and my studies, and I had strong opinions of what I wanted to do. I wanted to major in French, which did not require me to get a high final score. I told my parents that I would excel in the finals if they did not force me to go into the science track. I did just that. I remember pestering my mom to go and watch a Hindi movie on the eve of the exam. I told her I was prepared and I just needed a stress buster. Imagine that. Ironically, the movie was called Kamchor, which means work shirker or slacker. My mom, my partner in crime, and I enjoyed ourselves at the movies. Though I had my parents' support, my extended family assumed I would enter the sciences. Everyone knew there were only two set choices. And if you were smart, you picked doctor or engineer. If you did not, you were up to no good. I remember standing in the admissions line at St. Xavier's, a very sought after college in South Bombay. You're in the wrong line. The line for sciences is on the other side of the building. Yet again, although flattered, I felt invalidated. I was hurt and demoralized when key family members told me, you should be more ambitious. Why would you not pick science? You have no ambition. I wanted to stand up to them, but could I dare to dream, be assertive while towing the line and showing respect to my elders? Table tennis was my ultimate solace from the intense pressure I faced. I was a school and college table tennis champion. My dad's work colleague recommended a national champion to coach me. I was overjoyed when my dad, always supportive and encouraging, presented this option to me. The coach was a 35-year-old man with a family and a young child. He coached me weekly at a sports club in a small, poorly lit back room with no one else there. While I enjoyed learning and perfecting my skills to become a better player, I was very uncomfortable with the remarks the coach made to me. He touched me inappropriately a few times, which made me cringe. It was all so confusing to me. I was too scared and ashamed to call him out or challenge him openly. Thinking about going to coaching practice made me fearful. My chest tightened, my palms started to sweat, and dread set in. I could not summon the courage, find the words, speak up, and tell my parents. Instead, I chose to go within myself and made an excuse, telling my dad I wanted to stop coaching and focus on my studies. The only way I felt safe was to stop seeing the coach rather than call out his predatory behavior. Now, when I look back on this, I wonder what would have happened if I had said something back then. My own struggles, the emotional ups and downs I experienced, led me to pursue a master's in clinical psychology. However, my decision was ridiculed and judged, as most people had no idea what a therapist did or was. What even is the scope for this work? These are not real problems. Are you sure you're going to find a job that pays you for doing this? Were some of the questions I faced. Fortunately, I found work at a clinic with a psychiatrist specializing in children's mental health. I felt valued as I was making a difference in the lives of families. This helped shape me. I was encouraged to do presentations on mental health at neighborhood schools. Although I was nervous at first, I grew in confidence and noticed that my words, my voice had value. I saw how when problems were ignored or pushed down, they only grew bigger and resulted in tragic outcomes. Alas, outside the clinic, these problems were seen as weaknesses, inconvenient, and character flaws, not to be talked about in larger circles. It was as though I lived and worked in a different world, and the two worlds rarely met. My path brought me to Seattle for postgraduate studies, since everyone here has mental health issues, versus India, where we all have it together. My work furthered my belief that emotional wellness is key, but so often devalued and stigmatized. What if we tracked our emotional health just as we do our cholesterol and blood pressure? I was shocked to find the South Asian community in Seattle stuck in a time capsule with rigid, regressive, and unscientific beliefs about mental health, almost frozen in the year they immigrated to the US. My profession as a therapist was not valued as the engineers, doctors, lawyers, and finance gurus around me. They were considered the professionals, while my career was treated as a luxurious accessory and mostly expendable and unnecessary. Conversations around the dinner table centered around the really important issues like someone's newest home, stocks, latest vacation, or material possessions. Deeper emotions were buried under the carpet, except for gossip at someone else's expense. Our own taboos force us to trap our emotions into the shadows. My purpose of shining the light on the shadow areas to bring them out into the open has inspired me to become a therapist and a life coach. To me, talking about our struggles is brave, and to embrace our fears and to be vulnerable is to accept our whole selves. Being a rule follower and a barrier breaker has been a balancing act. Staying quiet but observant, not using my voice, but gently challenging the status quo has been a long and arduous journey. Can I speak my truth and still be a good girl, daughter, wife, mother, employee? This was my struggle. I questioned the truism behind the famous proverb, silence is golden. Would I be accepted and loved if I was a nonconformist and expressed how I felt? Would I be respected? Also, did I have something important enough to say? The answer to all these questions was always in me, but I learned to listen better. I learned that I absolutely can. As I listened and supported others to speak their truth, I found my own voice that was pushed down, trapped, and suppressed. The silent whispers grew bigger and bolder. Speaking truth to power is becoming easier. The more I use my voice, the less I may need to run from the fear of losing it. Thank you.
Thank you, Dipti. Thank you so much for that profound story. With that, I'd like to welcome our next participant. Our next participant is Paroma, and her title is Nasty Brown Tweets Meet White Women Tears.
Nasty brown tweets meet white woman tears. The dark room was lit by the green glow of a lamp. The heavily made up bleached blonde with bright red lipstick stared at me with dead fish eyes as she handed me an envelope. After that, all I remember is blurry letters floating on paper. Proposed to suspend you for 7 days for harassment. Last month, I was reading a book and the term white woman tears. The author had explained how white women for centuries had used their tears as their weapon to punish people of color. A few white tears, and the whole establishment ran to protect them. Then came the near attendant incident, where a brown woman in a position of power was denied a high-level position, rejected by white men in power because of what they called nasty tweets. And what were those so-called nasty tweets that cost her her job? Things like, Trump just called a black woman a dog, and 80% of GOP don't think he's racist. The whole party needs to be defeated in December. Wow, look at that level of nastiness. And here it was, our former president, calling his woman opponent a pig with lipstick. Oh, get on with the program. Boys will be boys. Not nasty at all. All this suddenly triggered a flood of memories that I had buried somewhere deep in a forgotten corner. The rush of emotions, the tears, and the blinding anger caught me unawares. Finally, something clicked. The tremendous guilt and shame that I had felt, the self-doubt, all came flooding back. But now, in a different light. I finally knew what it was. I was the victim of racism. I finally had the courage to call it what it was. Whiteness attacking a woman of color. The incident was about 2 years ago. Till then, I had laughed of the idea of racism in this country. Here I was, a 5'3" brown woman, sailing through life, being promoted on my merit, and could hold my own in a room full of aggressive white men. Race and gender, as I used to say, were made-up social constructs. I was the proud model minority. All that changed 2 years ago. With the change in administration, things at my government agency had changed. Suddenly, I started feeling like an outsider, as if I had no business being there. I was having a difficult time at the office, where my white male boss, encouraged by his equally white female deputy, had launched a "You are with us or against us" campaign against me. A white man used to getting his own ways does not take well to a brown woman standing up to him. I was passed over at meetings, and even when the issues were mine to explain, my male colleagues were called upon to opine on them. I wasn't introduced as a part of the front office in meetings, and generally made to feel very inadequate. Every decision I made was a hard-fought battle of words, and any discouragement was looked down upon. Any disagreement with my boss was an insubordination. I felt cornered, I felt unsafe, and as if I ever slipped a little, something terrible would happen to me. I felt they were looking for an opportunity to punish me for my color. I was tired of the fight and just needed to get away from it all, however briefly. It was a perfect Diwali lunch. And I vaguely remember some friendly banter where a white male colleague talked about another white woman colleague of ours, his close friend, about how obsessed she was with micromanaging written documents and was developing a style guide for editing. He joked that she must have a style guide for dating, and specific instructions for what to do in bed. Like the Kama Sutra. We all laughed. The cascade of events that followed led me down a dark path where anger and self-doubt and guilt and shame consumed me. A 15-minute lunch conversation outside the office in which I was a bystander. A 2-minute conversation where again I was a bystander. And one email where I was copied was represented as 3 separate instances, patterns of inappropriate behavior and harassment on my part. The white woman had complained and action was taken. Her tears had worked as intended, and the white establishment went into overdrive, avenging those tears. And who better to target than the only brown woman in that group? What followed was a series of meetings where my boss sat smugly in judgment. Even before the meeting started, the final verdict was written in stone. He knew it, and I knew it. It would have been so much easier just to accept the suspension and move on. But I don't think I would have been able to face my daughters and ask them to stand up to bullies if I did not follow through with this one. Over and over and over again, I was asked to apologize for my role in the harassment, for my failure to protect an employee, was asked why I had acted alongside my male colleague to demean another woman. Was the Kama Sutra mentioned in conversation, I was asked. Just the way he pronounced it made it seem so dirty. I remember sitting opposite him, cold and numb. And on and on and on this went. I lost count of the meetings, each leaving me more bruised. I was beginning to believe that I had not really done enough to protect a woman, that I had implicitly bought into the toxic patriarchy that I abhorred so much. The victim shaming had worked very well. Confused, guilty, angry, I talked to several male senior colleagues of mine about what was going on. And while they listened with a lot of sympathy, none of them raised a voice. White solidarity at its best. I know now that it was the white establishment that I had gone up against and lost. It was not against a lone white man. I was the only one suspended, other than that one colleague who had started the conversation, the only non-white woman out of the 7 people in that incident. Those 7 days at home were torture. It was as if there was a loudspeaker in my head blaring out, conduct unbecoming, harassment, your actions were intentional. My self-esteem was in shreds. I found myself shutting down whenever I had to face my boss and his deputy. I tried putting on a brave face for 6 months. The silent and not so silent persecution continued. I fought back. I would come back home every day and scream into my pillow every night. But I just could not take it anymore. I gave up and moved to a private sector firm. There, I happily settled in my current position, and for the past couple of years, chose to pull a very heavy veil over this incident, forgetting it and never for once remembering it. One day, the phone rang. A voice on the other end said I would represent a client on a particular matter in front of a regulatory agency. On the opposite side would be my former boss. I turned to stone. Just when I thought I had closure, there it was again. During the long hours of prepping for the case, I cannot tell you how many times I wanted to give up. But I recognized that the man I would face was only as powerful if I backed down and gave him the power to push me out again. with that realization, something changed. Slowly, the baggage I'd carried with me for 2 years began to lighten. Today, I have the courage to sit here and finally tell you my story, to see it for what it is, a blatantly racist incident where systemic whiteness had put its knees on the throat of a brown woman till she choked. Thank you.
Thank you, Paroma. Thank you for shedding light on this systemic racism that still haunts us all. Thank you for sharing your story. With that, I call upon our next participant, Aditya Babbar, and his story is titled Meri Tasveer.
Meri Tasveer. I can't go on like this. That's what you think. Waiting for Godot, Samuel Beckett. What follows is a classic tale of sorts. In it, I am the princess in the castle. I am Harry Potter stuck in the misery of his closet come bedroom. I am Ahab aboard the Pequod. However, the prince will never show. Hagrid will not surprise me on my 11th birthday, and I will never set sight on Moby Dick again. Because in this story, I will have to find out my own way out of my misery. I will have to slay the dragon myself, and even then, it may not be enough. It was another sunny July day, July 19th, 2020. It was my 25th birthday. It was summertime, and yet there was an uneasiness present in the air. The air was moist that morning. All day, clouds weighted with rain sat and stirred in the distance, both a warning and a reminder of what was to come. 25 years, 9,125 days, 219,000 hours, 13,140,000 minutes, 788,400,000 seconds. And what did I have to show for it? Just a feeling that plagued every happy memory I had and further soiled the sad ones. I am gay, and I like men. I hope to be married to one, with kids one day, and grandchildren too. For as long as I've thought of boys, romanticizing Jake Gyllenhaal in The Day After Tomorrow, Mark Ruffalo in 13 Going on 30, Jake Gyllenhaal again in Brokeback Mountain, Matt Bomer in The Normal Heart, and Jake Gyllenhaal once again in Love and Other Drugs, the fear that I would never be able to live out those fantasies never escaped my mind. I, the only son of two hardworking Indian parents who had immigrated to Canada for a better life for their children, couldn't possibly risking their one shot at conquering the Western frontier. For years, I would hold on to the secret, burying it deeper and deeper. And then I would see a boy smile at me in the hallway. And just like that, the feelings, the thoughts, the secret would reemerge. They say slow death is the hardest, and a blow to the morale can't be healed with bandages or ointment. After 25 years of holding on to so much anger and sadness at the world, at God, at my family, and especially at myself for the stagnant position I had chosen to embody, I wrote a letter to Mummy telling her that I was gay and the reason I had cut myself regularly in grade school, or took up smoking cigarettes in high school, or drank myself into blackouts in college, was all to escape the anxiety of what it might feel like to be myself for 1 second longer. I wrote the letter, sealed it, put it in the mother in the house, and went on my daily run. Throughout my run, I focused only on my breath, that one foot needed to follow the other, that if I just ran a little bit harder, pushed myself more, I could get out of the city, out of this house, out of this closet. I listened to the words of Rihanna, Beyonce, Nicki, Britney, Gwen, Christina, Kelly, Cardi, and Sweetie, my patron saints, to give me courage, to give me strength as I braced myself for everything that would come. Everything I had read about or seen in movies, articles, on the news of queer kids being thrown out, attacked, killed by their loved ones in shame. As I ran harder and faster, I was met with the people I used to be. The 5-year-old who loved his sister's Barbie more than she did. The 9-year-old who tried so hard to play with the boys, but could never kick the ball hard enough. The 12-year-old who turned to cutting because it was the one thing he could get right after failing to stand straighter, talk slower, and not move his hands around so much. The 16-year-old enraged with self-hatred. The 20-year-old intoxicated, spewing words bullies growing up would be so proud he held on to. In between, I also ran into other familiar faces, the many boys of my summer. The boy who bagged my groceries, whose hand grazed mine as he handed me my bags. The boy who was my partner in gym class, whose breath would hit the back of my neck as he told me I had just one more push-up left. The boy who sat in front of me in English class, who would always meet my eyes with the kindest smile. And the boy who taught me how to play the guitar, taking my hands into his. It is these boys, these moments long gone, never explored, stories that never got their middle or end, that cause me to be nostalgic. Nostalgic for a love that hasn't happened, a life that I haven't lived, a home that I haven't yet made, a place that I haven't yet found, a person that I haven't yet become. But no matter the amount of noise, silence has its way of creeping in. I ran as hard as I could, and suddenly all I could hear was the sound of my own breath, or lack thereof. As I inched closer and closer to home, the steps became heavier, harder to take. I stopped because I couldn't run any longer. I had to face the noise. I looked at my phone. Cheers by Rihanna was playing. Underneath, 9 texts. 8 from my sister telling me that it was okay, and that mommy was crying and laughing and dancing and asking where I was. The 9th text from mommy. Come home, I will always love you, no more running. I didn't get to run home. Mommy and Tanya came to pick me up. They just couldn't wait. I got in the back of the car. Mommy put her hand back and took mine in hers. Tanya reached back for my other. My tears became synonymous with the beads of sweat. Tanya's playlist played faintly, and Donny Hathaway began to sing. The road is long with many a winding turn that leads us to who knows where, but I'm strong enough to carry him. He ain't heavy, he's my brother. And for the first time, as Tanya fidgeted with the rearview mirror, I caught a glimpse of myself. And I wish this was the end, where music would carry us into a sunset, and in that moment, I won't lie, it surely felt that it was headed in that direction, and maybe it did. I thought that was just the beginning of a new relationship with her, where she'd really tell me stuff, where I'd say what I was feeling. But maybe it was never really like that again. Maybe that was it. We'd come home to one of the best tasting birthday cakes, genuine laughter, and mommy and I would stick to the leather sofa and talk our hearts out. But she would also remind me that I shouldn't tell my family and friends just yet, because they would judge me. And just like that, the moment would end. The thing that they always remember to leave out from books or movies or it gets better videos is that the hardest day sometimes is the one after, with yourself. July 20th, the 21st, the 22nd. I would continue to feel shame and guilt for the person I've always been. I would continue to try and control my posture, to clear my search history, tilt my phone away as I pondered over the picture of Jake Gyllenhaal for a second too long. And although I had come out, I would continue to exhaust myself in search for answers that had not yet been revealed. And it was these emotional come physical reflexes, the aftermath, not amongst others, but within myself, I wasn't prepared to handle. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Aditya, for sharing your story and your journey of courage. Thank you. Thank you very much. With that, next up is Mohima Barua, and her title is A Box Full of Darkness.
A box full of darkness. Someone I loved once gave me a box full of darkness. It took me years to understand that this too was a gift. This quote by Mary Oliver perfectly summarizes my life growing up. As a child and until well into my late teens, I carried a seemingly horrendous secret with me. that my family was highly dysfunctional and lacking in economic and social capital. My age dictates that I am now an adult, having celebrated my 28th birthday last month. While it was my 7th birthday outside of Bombay, it was a first in many other aspects. My first birthday in my own apartment, and my first birthday while the world was engulfed in battling a pandemic. The prospect of having my life engulfed in waves of unprecedented change, however, is not new to me. I remember thinking to myself at the beginning of the pandemic that my entire life had prepared me to handle being on the precipice of uncertainty. And now the rest of the world was getting to learn what that felt like. When I look back on the years I spent growing up in a rundown neighborhood of suburban Bombay, in a flat the size of a matchbox, the decrepit kind that was often overlooked by passers-by, a cacophony of sounds come to mind. The noise of children playing gully cricket, pressure cookers going off at erratic intervals, and my mother overlooking at this scene from the tiny window inside the kitchen. The near impoverished circumstances I grew up in were not entirely for the lack of resources and opportunity. My father left a government job with potential for stability to work in the Gulf, and by the time I had arrived, he was already away 6 months a year, and most of my memories play out with my mother and my brother as primary characters. My childhood had a distinct duality to it. The chaos and despair contained within the four walls of my home were to remain there once I boarded the bus to school, where I battled a strange tug of war between wanting to be seen and hoping I could get through the day unnoticed. This duality was lent by the strange circumstances which brought my parents together. It was a match made in the seventh circle of hell. My father was a first-generation city dweller from a very large and poor family in West Bengal, and the match arranged by his parents to my mother, who was 13 years younger than him, was already informed by chaos as my father had a college sweetheart. After enduring unspeakable abuse at the hands of her in-laws, it was sheer dumb luck that my father moved my mother to Bombay, legitimizing their marriage in a seemingly small but significant way. If it hadn't been for her relocation, my brother and I wouldn't exist, and I wouldn't be here telling the story. My father remained an enigma for the short 10 years that he had chosen to be a part of our lives. His job in the Gulf would keep him away, and during this time, he was essentially juggling a married life with my mother and carrying on an affair with the aforementioned girlfriend. I was far too young to understand the apprehension and fear my mother constantly felt around him. He had a volatile temper and an insatiable appetite for sex, which made him both physically and sexually abusive towards my mother. The negligence from my father increased after my mother had children, and raising us alone was an ordeal she had not signed up for. She succumbed to jaundice twice, and I ended up with stitches on both occasions. While I don't quite remember the first instance when I sustained a head injury, I quite vividly remember the second one. I was sitting cross-legged on the floor, struggling to finish my dinner, and my mother, harrowed and impatient, whacked me on the back with a little more force than she may have intended. I went flying across the room with my chin rubbing against the floor, halting only when my head hit the wall. Next thing I remember is my brother frantically opening the cupboard door, looking for towels, and myself in front of the mirror, bawling as a red beard flowed down my chin and being rushed to the hospital. Eventually, my father lost his job to recession, and my parents' marriage, barely hanging by a thread, completely unraveled. Both my mother's emotional breakdowns and my father's chronic alcoholism triggered my fight or flight tendencies in a terrifying manner. While corporal punishment was the norm in our household, when I was 9, my mother once took me aside and asked if my father had ever inappropriately touched me. He hadn't, although I knew then that no mother should ever feel the need to ask her daughter that question, and that no parents should ever encourage their daughter to make such an egregious marriage work. Many evenings were spent with me and my brother fleeing our home, seeking refuge with a neighbor, while other neighbors occasionally intervened between my parents in quest of saving my mother from sustaining serious injuries from my father's outbursts. One day I returned home from school and it truly felt like someone, or in this case, something, had died there. Perhaps it was my mother's will to stay in a toxic marriage. Perhaps it was my brother's childlike innocence, which left the day he felt the need to defend his mother from physical violence. Perhaps it was both. My mother had finally reached her threshold and called the police on my father. When I got home, the police had already left. Although I intuitively knew something had gone terribly wrong, as everyone was deathly quiet and avoiding eye contact with each other. When our upstairs neighbor noticed that I was home, she swiftly came down and took me away to feed me lunch and try to distract me. The event of my father's desertion is marked by two vivid memories. The dark, cloudy morning, akin to the calm before a terrible storm. My mother was trying to keep me preoccupied with a board game as my father walked in and out of my range of vision, quietly taking his belongings away. As he was on his way out for the last time, my mother fell to the floor, holding onto his leg, begging him not to go. I was horrified. Both my brother and I were, as we tried to pull her away from my father's clutches. In a society like India's, especially growing up lower middle class, you're never quite comfortable owning up to the fact that you're without a father. The ostracization I felt from my family and neighbors after my father left was palpable. Although my mother couldn't avoid the truth in her immediate circle, she would still wear a Mangal Sutra when she went to work. And I conveniently fell back to the excuse of, my father works in the Gulf, whenever inquired by classmates and teachers on his whereabouts. I had been written off by extended family as a cursed outcast, a person doomed to a life of prolonged generational suffering. The reclamation for aspiring to a life not informed by my circumstances was a quiet, enduring defiance which kept me sane back then. Still, the imposter syndrome I battled as a child, of not being like everyone else, of not having the same life as everyone else, left me hiding an Achilles heel I constantly feared would be exposed. It left me riddled with anxiety, skyrocketed my grades in school, but kept me from participating in any extracurricular activities which involved being in the spotlight. The day finally arrived when I ran the risk of being exposed. I was in fourth grade, and as my parents' marriage was crumbling, so were our finances. My mother had missed the deadline to pay my school fees. Names of students who still owed them were being called out over the speaker to the entire school. And as I stood up shaking, I felt the doomsday weigh heavily on my shoulders, fearing my cover had been blown for good, and now the whole class, which until that point had been my whole life, would know that I did not belong there. It was the first instance when I had been forced to acknowledge the weight of the unspoken grief and anguish I felt from getting impacted by my parents' turbulent marriage. I returned home and sank face first into my bed, drowning the sight of tears with loud, muffled sobs. It would be years later that I would find friends at the same school who would share details of their not so perfect domestic lives. At 17, when a few of my friends sat in an empty playground, I absently blurted out that my parents were divorced and my mother had raised me and my brother alone. I will never forget one of my friends' response to my self-pity spiral. Well, at least they split up. My parents are still together and I don't even know why. It completely shattered my illusion of marriages being intact simply because they hadn't been dissolved. It would be the year I would leave my childhood innocence and embark on learning the emotional complexities of the decisions people have to live with. My first boyfriend was the person I ever opened up to about my parents' divorce. I remember being on the phone and him telling me that his parents were divorced, and I blankly responded, "So are mine." It was as if a dam had been broken. I borrowed his idea of setting up a single parents on marriage websites in order to restart their lives. Everyone deserves companionship, he said. My relationship with my mother at this time took a pivotal turn as I started to acknowledge her as a person over being a parent, eventually reconciling as women. Turns out an offspring's permission was all that was needed for my mother to take reins of her own life. Her decision to marry again wreaked havoc amongst her parents and siblings. Even my brother found the idea abhorrent for a while. As a result, I, at 17, was the sole guest from my mother's side when she married my stepfather, a non-resident Indian residing in Seattle. That was a decade ago. And even now, 7 years after following my mother to a different country, I struggle to come up with a concise explanation of why and how I ended up here, on a different continent and in life. There's no short answer to this question. All I know is that I wouldn't have it any other way. While I am still miles away from being at peace with the domino effect of decisions that led to the chaos in my childhood, it is hard to imagine what life would have been like if my father had not left. I am still trying to reconcile with the notion of what's normal, which compels us to keep our lived realities hidden, even deem them as taboo.
Thank you, Mohima. Thank you for sharing your strength, your resilience with all our audience members. At this time, I also want to remind everyone, if you have any questions for our audiences, please put them in the chat box. And with that, I want to call upon our next participant. Next is Turfa, and the title of her story is I'm Not Crazy.
Hi, everyone. So, the title of my story is I'm Not Crazy. My story is about mental health and mental illness. Sometimes I can't believe here I am talking about my mental illness. Mental illness, those are for crazy people, right? People who are mental, kaku in the head, or maybe they only happen to celebrities, actors and actresses, or famous people. My parents were doctors. I went to a private school. I grew up very privileged. So I couldn't have mental illness. I couldn't be crazy. But that's what I thought. I still remember that fateful day when I read Deepika Padukone's article, her coming out about her depression. Such a huge Bollywood actress. And with all the fame and wealth she had earned at my age, if she could have it, why couldn't I? But when I went to the doctor, she diagnosed me with anxiety disorder. Anxiety. It was the first time I had heard that word. What did it mean? What could I be anxious about? All I knew was that I just felt like crying all the time. I felt worthless. I shivered in people's company and felt like everyone was judging me. And I didn't know why I was feeling this way because it was very unlike me. In order to find out why, I thought maybe it was my career. It wasn't where I wanted it to be or where it should be at the age of 25. But then eventually I did get a job, which I loved and I was very good at. So I thought it couldn't be my career. Then I thought maybe it was my marriage because I was very unhappy with my husband about our sex life. I resented my mother in law and I was on the verge of divorcing him. But I really needed to know, was my marriage causing me the anxiety? My anxiety causing my marriage to fail? To look for answers, I started to go to therapy. I still remember that first therapy session. My therapist told me to lie down on the couch, relax, facing away from her, and to just talk about whatever came to my mind. For some reason, I saw this yellow dress that I had when I was 4 or 5 years old. And after talking about that yellow dress for 30 minutes, I thought my precious therapy minutes were going away. So I sat up to face my therapist. And when I opened my mouth, I couldn't believe what I was saying. I told my therapist that my biggest fear was that one day my father will die and I have no good memories of him to look back on. I couldn't believe what I was saying because I never said that out loud before. When I said it, I cried. I cried my heart out like I never cried before. It wasn't the first time I would talk about my childhood or my father or my mother. There was going to be many more. As I kept going to therapy, I was learning so much about myself. And I also realized that mental health and mental illness was a hugely stigmatized topic in my community. So I really felt like a game changer, like in the movies, going to therapy. So I made these videos about my mental health and posted them on Facebook. I got a lot of encouraging and positive comments, but all I really cared about was what did my parents think. When I asked my dad, he just shrugged and said, it was okay. I didn't say much. When I asked my mom, she didn't have to. She looked like the day my O-level results had come out and I did not get all A's. Her face was full of shame and disgrace. She was so disappointed in what I had done. She looked like as if I had ruined her entire image in front of the public. I felt like I had disappointed her again. I had failed her again, and I failed to make her proud. And in that moment, all I felt like doing was throwing myself out of the car, which was speeding down the highway at 100 kilometers per hour. As I kept going to therapy, something else started to change, my personality. I started to talk like a little girl. And the more and more suicidal I got, the more and more the little girl stayed and she wouldn't leave. And I couldn't control it. I giggled at the silliest things. I just felt like coloring all day. I just wanted to sit on my husband's lap and be cuddled. When my friend saw me like this, she diagnosed me with personality organization disorder. She said that I must have endured trauma in my childhood. And as we were getting close to the trauma, my personality was splitting and taking me back to an age where I felt most safe to protect myself. When she asked me, "How old is little Turfa?" I said, "I'm 6 years old." It made me wonder what happened at the age of 6. I remember before I turned 6, we all used to live in Iran, and I was the happiest girl ever. I remember my father as just Baba. He was friendly and he was charming and handsome, and we would go on long walks together. I would punch him if I felt angry. He was just Baba, not someone I was afraid of, not someone I would run away from. He was just Baba. Everything changed when we came back to Bangladesh. My Baba had changed. And I also remember the first time he raised his hand on me. It was just a regular day and I was doing my homework, and for some reason my mother thought I wasn't, and she called my Baba to discipline me. At first I didn't understand why calling him was supposed to be a threat. But I remember him standing at the doorway, towering over me like a huge monster. His body language, his facial expression, something I didn't recognize. I knew something bad was about to happen, but I wasn't sure what. As my Baba called on me sternly in a growling voice, I remember he hit me on my leg with the belt he was holding in his hand. The sting of the belt ripped through my body, but I was shocked at what had just happened. Why had my mom said I wasn't doing my homework? Why had she betrayed me? Did I deserve this? And with that, I felt so much anger that I didn't want them to see how much they had hurt me. I didn't want to give them the satisfaction. And I slid back on my desk to do my homework as silent tears streamed down my cheeks. My Baba was not like he was before. He became dismissive. He always talked to me like he was angry. If I tried to make a conversation with him and talk to him, he would reply back in a very irritating tone, as if the sight of me disgusted him. As a young girl, I didn't understand why he was always angry at me. Did he not love me anymore? I don't know why, but somewhere deep inside, I made myself believe that I must have been a bad girl. And that's why my Baba treated me like that. In 2019, my husband and I decided we were going to start a family and have a child. So I had to bury the little Turfa because I could not have 2 children in my life. I needed to be the adult me so I could be the best parent I could be to this young child who was going to be born into this world. So on my birthday, in my mind, I wrapped her up in a white sheet and dug a hole in the ground to lay her there. I could feel her pain because she did not want to leave. She was not done getting the love and affection from her Baba. I hugged her tightly in my mind, gave her hugs and kisses and as much love as I could at that moment. Told her, "You're very much loved. Your Baba loves you too. But you have to go. You cannot be here." So I put her on the ground but I could not bring myself to push the soil over her body. I turned away and I cried myself to sleep. It's been 2.5 years now, and little Turfa has not left the grave. My anxieties and suicidal thoughts come and go, but I manage them. But it makes me wonder, is this it? Is this what the rest of my life going to be like? Is this it about my relationship with my Baba? Are we never going to get past the 3-question conversation? How are you? How's work? How's everything else? Is this what it's going to be? But now I know I'm not crazy. I never was. I'm just a result of my childhood, my upbringing, and my memories. I am who I am because of my past and my present. And this is my story. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Turfa. Thank you for sharing your beautiful story with us. With that, I invite our next performer on stage. Next is Masoon, and her title is Pin Drop Silences. Masoon, you need to unmute yourself.
Pin drop silence. My life was full of noise, laughter of childhood, commands and arguments of adulthood. I walked through an innocent passage of life into a chaos of injustice, which ended in a silent victory. My journey started in Sindh province of Pakistan. I had a happy childhood, playing with my friends, taking naps on a mango tree branch. Boys and girls all played together. We didn't see the gender differences. My freedom ended when I turned 12. I was told to stay home, no more meeting friends on the streets or farms. I was allowed to have female friends only. For my protection, a male servant had to escort me if I had to go outside the house. My uncle once told me that in our family, we treat women like a diamond, keep it in a safe place, and hide it from the public. I was a diamond, protected inside 4 walls of my father's house, which sometimes felt like a prison too. Finally, the day came and I got married. I was 20 years old and he was 35. I saw him from a keyhole a week before my wedding. He seemed a presentable, good-looking guy. He was settled in America. Our families arranged the marriage and I was happy that I was moving to America. First few years, we lived as a happy couple. He was dominating and controlling, but I was used to it. Men always controlled the women in my family. I thought it was normal. Things changed after my first child was born. We started having fights as I was voicing my opinions. Everyday discussions became an argument. He used his hands instead of his word to win fights. While watching a movie on a domestic abuse, he casually mentioned that he knows how to hit a person without leaving a visible mark on the body. I didn't believe him then, but I found out in many of our fights that it is possible. When he pulled my hair, pressed his hand on my face hard enough so that I could not breathe. These tricks didn't leave a mark on my body, but it bruised my soul. One morning, we had a fight while kids were in school. Same routine. He pulled my hair and pressed my face on the back of the sofa. I could not breathe. To get him away from me, I scratched him hard with my nails. Our neighbor heard screams and shouting and notified the police. An officer called on my home phone, asked me if I needed assistance. I told him, no, I'm fine. I didn't want him to go to jail again. As soon as I hung up the phone, he called the police and asked for assistance. When the officer came to our house, he showed them the scratches and told them to arrest me for a domestic violence. I was in shock. I was shaking, crying, but I didn't have any visible scratches or bruises on my body for show and tell. He was showing his wounds with teary eyes. With hissing sound, he was expressing his pain. He was playing a role of a victim. I couldn't decide what my role was. Was I a victim or an abuser? I was a victim, but I couldn't prove it. It was my words against his. I tried telling my side of the story, but he threatened the officers that if they didn't press charges against me, he will sue their department. I could feel the officers were confused. They were looking at a victim who had enough energy to prove his case, and an abuser who was crying and shaking. They took me in custody and asked to put my fists together for handcuffs. I remember I could not stand straight. My legs were shaking. I grabbed the officer's blue shirt. I wanted to hide my face in his chest and cry. I was hoping that this strange man would have mercy on me than my own husband. I was used to being surrounded by men who kept me protected like a diamond. Now, I was a pebble in the dirt that is being kicked out of the house. I was nothing. It didn't matter whose daughter, granddaughter, or sister I was. I felt stripped of all my titles. As a criminal, the officer walked me to his car and shielded my head when I was getting into the back seat. From the corner of my eyes, I could see the neighbors watching. I vividly remember when they took my handcuffs off at the booking station. My arms went straight to my chest, covering it, as if I was naked. My eyes were too swollen for a mugshot, so the officer asked me to wait on the bench. My tears ran out, but I was still crying with a dull moaning sound. An Indian police officer saw me in shalwar kameez, sitting on a bench, feeling ashamed and rejected. He took me in his office, gave me water, and convinced me to call my sister. On the phone, my sister kept asking me if I was playing a joke on her. I didn't say yes or no, just gave her the address and told her to come for the bail. Click, click, flash, fingerprints, sign. I was booked. With other inmates, I walked quietly toward the prison cell with one apple and a small blanket in my hand. Someone asked why I was here. Domestic violence, I said quietly. She laughed and said, "Did you kill a roach?" We all laughed. After a few hours, my family bailed me out. I stayed with my sister for 3 months until he apologized to me and to my family. We had a couple of marriage counseling sessions with my uncle and aunt. He assured them that he would never make this mistake again. And if things got out of control, we will involve them to resolve our differences. My children were tired of living in someone else's house. My son, 10 at the time, was trying to assure me that Papa is really sorry. I promise you, Mom, I will never let him hurt you again. I was working at a good paying job, but I was not ready to divorce him. After a couple of months of peace, fights and arguments became a routine again. My son tried to shield me, but sometimes he would get pushed or hit. I noticed that after an argument, my husband would get energized, while I would sink into depression. I was living with the fear that one day he would kill me in self-defense. I was living with the fear that one day he would kill me, and self-defense would be the reason on the police report. Now, all I could do was to keep myself and my kids safe by not arguing with him, not telling him what my likes or dislikes. I quietly listened to his complaints and his disappointments without voicing my mind. During one summer, I was visiting my sister with my children. He called and told me that he's rewiring the house and asked me to stay with my sister over the weekend. When we came back, the house was dark. All the walls in the living room and dining room were open. Live wires and insulations were hanging from the wall and the ceiling. The air was full of dust. Children started crying and showing me what he had done to our house. I was standing in shock. My ears were ringing as a bomb had blasted in front of me. I didn't ask him why or what the plan was. All I could see, these four walls that hold our secrets of abuse and dysfunctional environment, were open. My son was trying to get me out of the shock by pointing at a broken wall shelf. He was shaking me and saying, "Look what he has done to your shelf." This was my shelf, which I was allowed to decorate on my own. He controlled everything, the placement of the furniture, things in the cabinet. Now the broken shelf and my thrift store findings were scattered on the floor. But I was quiet. The next day, he was trying to engage in a conversation with me, saying he needs to be careful with his project because he's not licensed. My ears were listening to his voice, but my eyes were looking at the destruction. My nose was smelling the dust from the open insulation. I couldn't feel my mouth to release my anger. I quietly listened to him and didn't say a word. Every night I slept with a horrifying thought that the house will burn down and we all will be killed. All I could think of was what my daughter, 13 at that time, said to me. "Mom, you can stop this. A lot of people take divorce." I told her, "No, I can't." I was so sure of my no at that time. The thought of living a life without a man was unknown, dangerous, and scary. But the life I was living with a man was also dangerous and scary. It was not about me anymore. It was about my children that came through me. They were my diamonds. I have to keep them safe. I have to cross this bridge on my own and trust the higher source to lead me in the right direction. One day after work, I parked my car in my driveway and called my sister. I told her that I was going to file for divorce. I didn't know how, but I have to get my kids out of this house. Soon, with the help of my coworkers, I made a checklist. Number 1, get a mailbox at a post office. 2, find a divorce attorney. 3, open a separate bank account on my name. 4, find a weekly rate motel where I could stay with my children. 5, sell enough employee stocks that would cover the expenses. My divorce process took 4 years, but my attorney was able to get him out of the house in a month or two after the process started. Before moving back in the house, I got the wiring fixed and closed the walls. The house that once was the house that was once broken became a complete home. After work, I would come home, make tea, sit on the sofa with my legs resting on the ottoman, and watch the world news on TV in peace. That was something I had never experienced on my own. Now, the chaos and noise are outside. In my home, it's me and pin drop silence. Thank you.
Thank you, Masoon. Thank you. Thank you for your power and thank you for your strength. You are so inspiring. With that, I now invite Abhishek on stage to share his story titled The Gift.
The gift. How many sleeping pills are left in the cabinet? Which one of the 3 bridges in Seattle is the tallest? How painful is it really to slash one's wrists? On a bright Seattle spring morning in April 2018, as I was pondering these questions, I was sitting in our living room. My wife was sleeping upstairs, and I had just fed our 2 cats. I had not eaten much at all the past week since I had no desire to feed myself anymore. The sparrows and finches on our bird feeder were chirping noisily as the sunlight was streaming in from the tall south-facing windows. My mind could care less about the birds chirping outside and wanted me to focus on its own chirping. Just as the dormant buds outside were eager to bloom, I wanted to nip my life and go into permanent hibernation. I also came across some very innovative ideas on internet forums. The thought that I'm not alone in trying to end my life somehow comforted me. That I'm sitting here today in front of you has ruined the suspense for you listeners. I have been on quite a roller coaster ride these past 3 years, certainly the most challenging times of my life to date. A life that was given to me by my parents 42 years ago. A life only made possible because all my ancestors going back generations survived through theirs. And I came this close to ending it. I left India the first chance I got and landed in the US as a naive 21-year-old trying to find my voice. I could not take the toxic environment at home anymore. My parents were going on 40 years of cohabitation under one roof by the time my chronic insomnia had turned into a nightmare. Despite very little sleep for weeks and hardly any food, I still kept driving to work to try to do what a 39-year-old South Asian man with a PhD in chemical engineering is instructed by society to do. Just fight through, carry on, and show up to work. I couldn't even decide what I wanted to eat for lunch at the work cafeteria. I would stand in the line, dazed and confused. One day, the lady at the checkout counter said, "You don't look right. Are you okay?" I had just given her my driver's license to pay for my food. On the insistence of my wife and co-workers, I sought medical help. The front desk at the doctor's office had me fill out a questionnaire form designed to gauge my emotional state. My score was apparently bad enough that my doctor prescribed an antidepressant. The diagnosis read Major Depressive and Anxiety Disorder, DSM, code F32.9. DSM stood for Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, I'd learn later. Felt strangely reassuring to know that medical science had an exact numerical code for my condition. Is the human mind, with all its emotions and thoughts and desires and dreams, so simple to analyze? I applied for a short-term disability leave with support from my doctor, my psychiatrist, and my therapist. A 1-month leave turned into 4, as things got much worse before they got better. My therapist encouraged me to be extra gentle and compassionate with myself. I had always struggled to accept and love the man in the mirror. I loved to hate myself. I was never good enough, not as a son, a husband, a friend, or a colleague. Unlike my therapist, I was uncertain about my recovery and scared because I had never experienced such severe depression. Life felt very heavy, just crushing me down under its immense weight. So heavy that the simple act of getting out of bed in the morning was a monumental task. My wife would come up with a plan for what I could do during the day, go for a walk or play with our cats. I would hear her and then just crawl under the bed sheets, praying that I would vanish into nothingness. Carrying on living seemed so pointless as I had lost all hope. What right do I have to feel depressed with my privileged life when billions of other people have it much worse? I have a loving soulmate, a nice house, a 6-figure salary, good friends, 2 adorable cats, a car, money in my bank accounts. Didn't I check all the ingredient boxes of the recipe to cook up a happy life? These thoughts would sneak in undetected when I could not stand guard at the door of my mind. They were another way I was self-sabotaging my own feelings, a skill that I had masterfully acquired over my entire life. I judged myself harshly for being weak. I was failing handsomely in following my therapist's advice. My suicidal thoughts increased in intensity over time, and my doctor got very worried with my response to the question on thoughts that you would be better off dead or hurting yourself in some way. My response had graduated over time from several days to nearly every day. My honest reality was that I wished that nearly every second of every minute of every day. But there was no such option on the form. My doctor immediately had me fill out a suicide prevention plan with the help of the clinic social worker. I never thought in my wildest imagination that I would get to this point in my life. Around the same time, our 15-year-old cat Mitsu started having serious health issues. All of a sudden, he lost all his appetite, his energy, and just wasn't quite himself. Very much like my own symptoms. I had read in spiritual books that animals have this remarkable ability to take upon and reflect the challenges of the humans that they cohabit with. I wondered if this is what Mitsu was doing for me, which made me feel guilty because now my wife had to take care of 2 patients in the home. Until this time, I had really struggled to share my condition with others, even with those that I trusted. I consciously decided not to tell my parents, who lived thousands of miles away in India. There was nothing they could do to help me, and I didn't want them to worry. To this day, they don't know, and I feel some guilt around that. One of my biggest fears is, what if they are in the audience right now, listening to my story? How would they feel? Betrayed? Angry? Sad? I felt unsafe and ashamed to share this experience with anyone because I feared I would be judged and ridiculed, or worse yet, abandoned. I eventually confided in my younger sister and brother-in-law and a select few friends, along with my longtime men's support group. And of course, they didn't abandon me. By the end of July, after 2 months of force feeding Mitsu, my wife and I made the hard decision to put him down. It was a beautiful Seattle summer day with life buzzing everywhere. The vet had the room ready with soothing music playing as the warm, dim light from the lamp caressed a plush animal printed blanket laid out on the table. As Mitsu's frail body lay in my lap and he stopped moving after the first sedating injection, my dam broke. For what seemed like the first time in ages, I actually felt my feelings. Tears uncontrollably continued to flow like a gushing waterfall, every tear caressing my cheeks with its own story and its own sacred feelings of loss, of sadness, of helplessness. Mitsu's immobile body on my lap was a stark visual of confronting death as life left his innocent little heart. An image raced through my mind, seeing my own dead body if I had followed through on any of the suicide options. In that very moment, as the tears kept flowing, I heard a voice saying, "Your life is a gift." It felt like a surreal moment of energetic exchange where Mitsu, in his graceful death, gave me the gift of life. It was a deeply sacred moment, revealing the juxtaposition of life and death in this eternal cycle. Looking back, that was the day everything changed. My wife and I put the empty pet carrier in our car and took a walk around Green Lake, still sobbing, trying hard to breathe. Everything appeared much brighter to my eyes, despite the sunglasses that I was wearing. It was as if I was seeing life through a new lens, colored with marvel and possibilities. Seeing dogs taking a stroll with their human partners seemed so magical. Realizing that my heart will also stop beating one day, I sensed a new meaning to the finiteness of my life. And at 39, perhaps I had already lived through half of mine. Standing at this existential crossroads, I now had to choose how to sing in tune with the unique beat of my own heart. I'm still amazed at the transformation of my thoughts during that walk. Isn't life strange? That staring in the face of death, both Mitsu's and mine, was what it took for me to see the gift that I had been given. And in hindsight, it was all truly a gift. Reading about other people's stories of depression slowly helped me gain a new perspective on my own, which was to view it as a friend rather than an enemy. Even my suicidal thoughts were symbolic of the parts of myself that needed to die, just as leaves fall away at season's end to make way for fresh blossoms next spring. I needed to let go of this heavy bag of limited beliefs that I had been dragging all my life, and sow the fertile soil of my mind with seeds of empowering beliefs that would serve the man I am today to blossom into his fullest expression. Ultimately, my depression was an invitation for me to truly love the man in the mirror. It came to remind me that there's really nothing more to life than to watch my cats lick themselves after a meal, to hear the birds chirping outside, and to feel the warmth of the sunshine on my skin. Thank you.
Thank you, Abhi. Thank you so much for your vulnerability, for showing us a new way of how depression can be looked at. Thank you for that perspective. And with that, I'd like to now invite on stage our last performer for the evening, Saleha, and the title of her story is The Bird on the Perch.
The bird on the perch. You feed a bird the nutrients it needs to survive and thrive to become the sweet-talking, fluttery, loyal, and active bird it is meant to become. Yet, when it's mature and ready to leave the nest to fulfill its journey in life, it can't, because it's locked up in a cage. Yet, it keeps chirping, singing, showing affection when you hold it, and becomes comfortable as all things do. Perhaps even to the point that if the door to its cage was open, it still would not fly away. I was 17 years old and the third middle child. I had finally found the courage to ask my father if I could participate in volunteering for a more active and co-ed masjid during the Thanksgiving holiday. It was a stepping stone to be more involved. My older brother was always participating in something or other, and I wanted to do the same. My family didn't celebrate much of any national holiday, stamping it as haram, aka non-permissible. And my holidays were spent pretty much at home watching TV, playing video games, outside, and reading books, at least for me. I was born in Pakistan and moved here when I was 3 years old. I had spent my life very sheltered and naturally was passed down knowledge that my family had, which was highly cultural and patriarchal. That changed as I went on my own personal journey to learn about my religion, and social responsibility was a part of it. I had an argument with my parents recently as to why my older brother could continue visiting his friends, especially after dark, but I couldn't. The answer finally came through that he's a boy and you're a girl, so it's just different. What they really meant to say was that I was a woman now, and they didn't want any bad influences near me. I had been seething with anger over this patriarchy. It had happened so many times, yet I was powerless. It didn't help being the middle child, not old enough to be taken seriously, and not young enough to baby. However, I thought this time would be different because I was doing something morally good, which was aligned with the values we practiced. I went up to my father and asked if I could volunteer in the event with my friend. He was dumbstruck. How did she manage to even find such an opportunity? And why was she going beyond what was traditionally done for a girl? Finally, he said, why bother going all the way out there and spend your day doing that when you can just donate money and call it a day? That didn't make any sense as I was just a teenager, barely making anything. I said okay and walked away. Angry but also defeated, I didn't have the will to fight back anymore. When evening came, he asked why I didn't go. I was shocked, confused. Did that mean I didn't need his permission or that he didn't actually care? Was my family afraid of us becoming too Americanized if we were exposed and go on a domino effect, becoming wild teenagers up to no good? I continued to make 2 steps forward, 10 steps back, in getting my family's permission and acceptance to live a balanced, normal life. I became afraid of venturing out because it was hard to join when I had such gaps in my presence in the community. My lack of knowledge made me retract into my shell. When this bird's cage was closed constantly at opportunities, she gave up trying. I had a chance to learn about the cycle of generational trauma from, of all places, social media. This allowed me to have empathy for them as first-generation immigrants trying their best to survive and raise their family in unknown territory. And now they were in an entirely new country they had to navigate. New rules, language, etiquettes, culture. Perhaps for them, the more conservative, the more safe we all were, which repeated the cycle. Even if you're from a lower or middle class family with no family legacy, money, high education, or assets to leverage your status in society, there's one thing no one can take away from you, and this is your izzat, respect. So to protect that izzat, they chose to live a limited, simple life. But this was the best life to them because it had izzat. Yet, no matter how conservative my family may have been, knowledge was there for the taking in the form of the library. Books, the movies, classmates, and of course, the internet. As a teenager, I spent a lot of time learning about my religion, society, the world really, and what it had to offer. I met people in college with similar and different backgrounds who were doing amazing things. I was a bird looking at all the pretty colors outside my cage, but never really going out to see it up close. I continued to read, read, read. Fast forward 10 years. It's over. I'm divorced. I don't feel anything except for a feeling of relief. I had spent the entire last year going through hell and back. My entire family went through arranged marriages, and I didn't foresee myself ever meeting someone or my family ever accepting it. That was my world when I entered the arranged marriage in good faith and trust in Allah. From the betrayal from the man I married, the family politics and biased strategies to make things work, and my teaching career being put on hold because of stress and deep depression, my family did their best to try to save my izzat and marriage. However, it was biased nonetheless, and I needed to seek help from someone they would actually endorse, the imam. That was a scary step for me because I didn't want my family to feel like I betrayed them. Be that as it may, it was also necessary. Without it, my life would be what my family thought was best for me and not my God-given right to decide for myself. I had a meeting with the imam and my father and knew that if things got tricky, I could reach out to him as a mediator to close that communication gap and separate culture from Islamic rights. My friends were my rock that year. They were there for me to listen to my story, to let my voice be heard, and God knows I felt it needed to be heard. They dragged me out of the house to lift my spirits when I was sinking into my bed for days on end like a black hole. They joined my plans for a summer bonfire picnic at Alki Beach. They went on road trips with me to Canada, But most importantly, they helped me understand to not give my ex, who was unaffected, so much power to make me depressed that I was putting my career and life on hold. In the words of Rumi, journeys bring power and love back into you. If you can't go somewhere, move in the passageways of the self. They're like shafts of light, always changing, and you change when you explore them. I didn't ask for my family's approval anymore. Most of the time, it was okay. But sometimes I was faced with resistance, in which case I was okay with being the bad girl. I wasted enough time for their acceptance when it would never come. The following year, I went on after countless adventures. When spring came, I went to the Tulip Festival. It was the last day of April and incredibly sunny, warm, and windy. The perfect combination. I didn't take an assignment for substitute teaching that day, but my family didn't know that. I got ready that morning by wearing a dress with blue stripes and colorful tassels. I had the perfect royal blue tassel earrings to match. I took the time to straighten my waist-length hair at the time, which I never did. I put on makeup with rosy pink lipstick. I wore silver bangles and spritz on a floral perfume. I didn't forget to take the white chiffon dupatta that just happened to cross my path on my way out. I closed my eyes and was embraced by the sun. The wind weaved through my long silky hair as I breathed in the freedom. I lifted that white dupatta in the air with both hands so high it felt like I was touching the sky. I let the wind lift it as a bird's wings are lifted by the gush of wind. I let the dupatta envelop me and had a blissful moment of peace that everything was going to be okay. And of course, I had a DDLJ moment I couldn't resist. I secretly participated in Holi that same spring and celebrated with vibrant colors the end of the harsh cold winter and the beginning of new things to come. I began attending concerts for the first time at the age of 25. Better late than never. I went to Neha and Sonu's concert close to my heart. Incredibly nervous and anxious, I almost backed out, but I didn't. I drove out to Canada to see Karan Aujla's first live concert, VIP. I got my first picture with a celebrity. Karan's songs during that difficult year diverted my thoughts and put me in an incredibly good mood with my car concerts. If he's watching this video, thank you so much. When I realized my friends won't be available all the time, I found the courage to venture out on my own. I went to Fanafi Allah's Sufi concert in Fremont on a dark, cold, pouring October night. I couldn't see a thing in the rain and was afraid I would get into an accident or worse, mugged. Row by row, my seat kept getting closer to the very front, as if by divine intervention. My mind immersed in a hypnotic, meditative state. I felt my spiritual union with Allah building, not just listening to the devotional praises of the higher power, but feeling it. Every atom in my body pulsating, my soul shivered from ecstasy and gratitude of being reminded of the ultimate love of the divine. Al-Wadud, the most loving, the most worthy love to be received and given, greater than the love of not one, but 70 mothers. Tears escaping my eyes, I was reminded that I was alive. My journey had yet to begin. I filled my cup that night and left elated. The bird had finally left the cage. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Saleha. That is so inspiring and happy, and thank you for sharing. Thank you to all the participants. Thank you for your courage, your resilience. It takes a lot to share your personal stories, and I'm sure our audiences have loved it and have a lot of questions for you all. So with that, let's dive into our live Q&A. To the audiences, please know that for the live Q&A, you need to go to another link. The link is posted on the chat. We will begin our live Q&A shortly.